The last thing I expected to see on a quiet morning was a pair of police cruisers, barreling down my ranch road, kicking up so much dust you'd think there was a chase in progress. I stood there on my cedar porch, gripping my coffee mug tight enough to threaten the ceramic integrity. Watching the chaotic scene unfold with a mixture of confusion and rising cold anger, two deputies stepped out, hands hovering near their belts, looking tense and ready for a confrontation, while behind them, a silver luxury SUV screeched to a halt in a cloud of gravel. Out stepped Brenda, the HOA president from the subdivision next door, pointing a manicured finger at me like she was identifying a wanted fugitive. She was screaming something about threats and weapons, her voice shrill enough to cut through the heavy, humid air and startling the birds from the trees. This wasn't just a neighbor dispute anymore. She had escalated this to a level of insanity that could get someone killed. What she didn't know yet was that this moment, right here, was the beginning of the end for her little empire of tyranny. She had just declared war on a man who spent 30 years negotiating hostile takeovers and managing crisis logistics. And she was about to find out that while she played checkers with bylaws, I played chess with banknotes. To understand how we got to this standoff, you have to understand the geography and the history. I bought this ranch specifically to escape the noise of the city. After selling my logistics company for a sum that allowed me to retire early, I wanted silence, land, and a view of the water. My property is 300 acres of Texas hill country heaven, bordering the north side of a massive reservoir, the south side. That's Whispering Pines, a dense master-planned community ruled by an HOA board that treated their covenants like sacred texts. I wasn't part of their HOA. My land was independent, grandfathered in from a deed that predated their subdivision by 50 years. But that didn't stop Brenda. Brenda was the archetype of suburban boredom turned malicious. A woman who derived her entire sense of self-worth from enforcing arbitrary rules on others. It started small. She'd send me courtesy notices about my grass height, which I ignored because, again, I wasn't in her jurisdiction. She'd complain about the color of my barn. She'd complain about the noise of my tractor. I treated her like a buzzing, fly-annoying, but harmless. Then, I bought the boat. It was a 20-foot pontoon, nothing fancy, just something to cruise the lake and fish for bass. I built a dock on my shoreline fully permitted by the river authority and moored it there. The next day, Brenda was at my fence line, red-faced and trembling with indignation. She told me the boat was an eyesore. She told me it violated the aesthetic integrity of the lake view for her residents. I politely told her to get off my property. That's when the campaign of terror began. She started filing anonymous reports with every government agency in the alphabet. The EPA, the DNR, the county health department. I had inspectors crawling all over my land looking for non-existent sewage leaks and illegal burn piles. She flew drones over my house at 6 in the morning to catch me violating noise ordinances. It was a relentless siege designed to make me sell and leave. But I don't bully easily. I dug my heels in. I installed security cameras. I kept a log of every interaction. But Brenda was getting desperate. She needed a win. So, on that Tuesday morning, she called 911 and told the operator I had pointed a rifle at her from my boat. That's a felony. That gets a SWAT team sent to your house. When the deputies approached me, I remained calm. I slowly raised my hands. I told them there were cameras on the dock that would show I was holding a fishing rod, not a rifle. They watched the footage on my phone right there on the porch. The tension in their shoulders dropped instantly. They looked at the video clear as day showing me casting a line and sipping water. Then they looked at Brenda, who was still screaming by her car about imminent danger. The sergeant walked over to her, and I heard the words filing a false report. She went pale. They gave her a citation and a stern warning that if she wasted their time again, she'd be leaving in cuffs. As she drove away, she slowed down, rolled down her window, and yelled, "I will ruin you. I own this lake. You have no idea who you are dealing with." That specific phrase stuck with me. I own this lake. It was a strange thing to say. I went inside, adrenaline still pumping, and sat at my desk. I decided it was time to stop playing defense. It was time to go on the offensive. I didn't get mad. I got curious. I started digging into Brenda's life. I used the same forensic accountants I used in my business days to look into the HOA's financials and, more importantly, Brenda's personal holdings. It turns out Brenda didn't just run the HOA. she owned the local marina on the South Shore. It was a separate business entity, but she used her HOA influence to force residents to rent slips there. It was a conflict of interest, sure, but that wasn't the smoking gun. The smoking gun was the balance sheet. The marina was drowning. She had taken out a massive commercial loan to renovate the clubhouse and install high-speed fuel pumps, expecting a boom in summer tourism that never materialized. The reviews were terrible, mostly complaints about her attitude, and price gouging and revenue was in freefall. I pulled the UCC filings and public records. She was leveraged to the hilt. Then I saw it, the golden ticket. Her promissory note was held by a regional bank that had recently been acquired by a larger conglomerate. I knew how these mergers worked. The new parent company would be looking to shed non-performing assets to clean up the books before the fiscal year. Brenda was 90 days past due on her mortgage payments. She was technically in default, but the bank just hadn't gotten around to dropping the hammer yet. They were busy with the merger. I picked up the phone. I called a contact I had in commercial real estate acquisitions and told him to get me the loss mitigation officer at that bank. By that afternoon, I was on a call. I didn't tell them I was her neighbor. I just told them I was an investor looking to acquire distressed commercial paper in the area. They were eager to sell. They viewed the marina as a toxic liability. I offered to buy the note for the full principal amount, cash. If they could close in 48 hours, they sent the paperwork over within the hour. It cost me a significant chunk of my savings, but this wasn't about money anymore. It was about peace. By Thursday, the wire transfer cleared. I held the paper. I was now Brenda's bank. I owned her debt. And because she was in default, I had the right to accelerate the loan. I could demand the entire balance over $1 million immediately. If she couldn't pay, I could foreclose and take the property. I sat on it for the weekend. I watched her from my porch. She was still patrolling the fence line, looking for violations, looking for a way to hurt me. She had no idea the sword of Damocles was hanging over her head. On Monday morning, I didn't call the police. I didn't call a lawyer. I walked into the marina. It was empty save for a bored teenager sweeping the floor. Brenda was in her glass-walled office shouting into a phone about a late delivery. When she saw me, she slammed the receiver down and stormed out. "You," she shrieked. "I told you, this is private property. Get out before I have you arrested for trespassing." I stood my ground, my pulse steady. "Actually, Brenda," I said, my voice low and even, "we need to talk about property rights." She laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that grated on my ears. "I have nothing to say to you. Get out." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. I tossed it onto the counter. "You might want to read that before you call the sheriff," she sneered, grabbing the envelope. "What is this?" "Another cease and desist." "I wipe my ass with these." She ripped it open. I watched her eyes scan the first page. It was the notice of sale and transfer of lien. I saw her brow furrow. She flipped to the second page. The notice of acceleration. She stopped breathing. Her face went from red to a terrifying shade of gray. She looked up at me, her hand shaking so hard the papers rattled against the countertop. You bought the loan," she whispered. "I did," I replied, leaning casually against the counter. "And as you can see, you are in default. I am exercising my right to call the full balance due. You owe me $1.2 million, Brenda, and I'd like it by the end of the business day." She collapsed into her chair, the fight draining out of her instantly. "I don't have it," she stammered. "I know," I said. "I've seen the books. You're broke. You're insolvent. The only thing keeping this place open is the bank's laziness." "But I'm not lazy," she started to cry. It wasn't a sympathetic cry. It was the cry of a bully who had finally been punched back. "Please," she begged. "This is my life. You can't take this from me." "You tried to send a SWAT team to my house," I reminded her coldly. "You tried to ruin my reputation. You tried to drive me off my own land. You wanted a war, Brenda? You got one? Now, here are your options." I laid it out for her. Simple, brutal. Option 1, she loses the business, her credit is ruined, and I take the assets. Option 2, she signs a deed in lieu of foreclosure. She hands over the keys, the business, and the land to me. In exchange, I forgive the debt. She walks away with nothing, but she walks away without a bankruptcy on her record. And, I added, you resign from the HOA board. immediately today, and you stop the harassment permanently." She looked at the papers, then at me, then around the shabby Marina office she had ruled like a fiefdom. She knew she was beaten. She grabbed a pen. It took her 3 minutes to sign her empire away. She packed a box of personal items, mostly framed photos of herself receiving awards, and walked out the door without a word. I watched her drive away, and for the first time in 6 months, the silence at the lake was real. I didn't want a marina. I didn't want to run a fuel dock. But I hired the kid who was sweeping the floor to manage it. I lowered the gas prices for the neighbors. I opened the boat ramp to the public. The mood in the community shifted overnight. People stopped looking over their shoulders. The HOA meetings went from shouting matches to boring discussions about mulch, which is exactly how they should be. As for the exhale, she sits proudly at the end of the main dock now. Every time I take her out, I wave to the shore, half expecting to see Brenda with her megaphone, but she's gone. She moved to towns over. Rumor has it, she tried to run for city council and got laughed out of the room. It's crazy looking back on it. I just wanted to fish. I just wanted to drink my coffee and watch the sunrise. But sometimes, to get peace, you have to be willing to bring the thunder. I spent a lot of money to buy a failing business I didn't need, but the return on investment, infinite vindication, has a price tag, and I was happy to pay it. The best part wasn't owning the marina. It was seeing the realization in her eyes that she had pushed the wrong person too far. It was the moment the power dynamic flipped, and the predator became the prey. It's a lesson in leverage. Never start a fight you can't finish, and never assume the quiet guy on the ranch doesn't have the ammunition to end you. So, that's how I ended up owning a marina I never wanted. It's a lot of work, sure, but every time I look at the ledger, I smile. It's the most expensive trophy I've ever bought, and it was worth every penny. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to go nuclear on a neighbor to get some peace? Did you ever use the rules to destroy someone who was abusing them? Like, share, and drop your take on where you draw the line between leadership and controlled justice and revenge.